Illawarra. Locals at gate 97.
Now, can you imagine you go overseas for a holiday and then you get stuck and you never make it home again? That's what happened to Lone Nitel's family when they left China for Vietnam. This is back in the 1930s. Generations of the family were then caught up in wars and political events beyond their control. And after the Vietnam War, they were found on a fishing boat heading for Malaysia. For Refugee Week, Lone Nitel joins me from Fig Tree. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, and thank you for talking to us. When did you arrive in Australia?
I came in 1980, so I was a child at the time.
And who were you with?
I was with my mum and dad and my cousin, who's my dad's nephew. So he was a teenager.
Right. And what did you know about your family's history, as I said, from China to Vietnam and then Malaysia?
With my grandparents, what I heard was Mum talks about it often because my mum never really got to meet her older brother. So he was sort of left behind in China as a teenager. My grandparents went to Vietnam, thinking it was a holiday. Then the war started and they were never able to get back. And so they had to make a new life in Vietnam. My uncle at the time, he was studying, he was at school, and my mum's grandparents thought it was better just to leave him and let him continue studying while they went on a usual trip. They didn't see him again until 40 years later.
They did actually get to see him again, though.
They did, yeah. It wasn't until we actually sponsored my grandparents to Australia, and then from Australia they made the trip into China, so 40 years later they got to see their son. So Mum tells me that story.
Of course.
Every once in a while.
Wow. What are your earliest memories of, I guess, you were quite young when you came to Wollongong, of growing up in Wollongong? Yeah,
so I was a child. When we left Vietnam, I was just a baby, and we went, we were on a boat for like 6 days as refugees, going out of the country, and went to Malaysia, and then we stayed on a refugee camp at Pulau Bedong in Malaysia for a year. How long
for a year in Malaysia? Yeah.
For 1 year, yeah. So that was actually, we were quite lucky because we were sponsored by the Sisters of Mercy in Grafton, and they sponsored us and another family to come to Australia. But a lot of our friends, they had been at the refugee camp long before us, and they didn't leave until, long after we had left. So we were quite lucky to only be there for 12 months.
Yeah. What did your parents think was going to, when you got to Malaysia, were they sailing for a week on a fishing boat to Malaysia, hoping to make a life there, or was the idea to try and make it to another country?
I think what it was is just trying to get out of Vietnam. Yeah. It was just really anywhere was better than Vietnam. At the time, the government was quite hostile towards, people from Chinese descent. And we weren't really sort of made welcome being Chinese living in Vietnam. So they took that opportunity to leave the country. There wasn't sort of, any freedoms anyway. Yeah. Mum remembers growing up, two of her uncles in the middle of the night, someone said they were spies, so they just got taken away, and she never saw them again. So it was just quite a frightening place to grow up.
This is also in the late 70s where Cambodia and Khmer Rouge was also, hassling Vietnamese villages as well. So there was a lot going on.
Yeah. There was heaps. And because we were, we were farmers, we had land, we had crops, so the government would just come and take whatever they wanted. Mum said there was no such thing as, you can't say, you can't have a lawyer until so they support you or anything like that. It was really just, you're a spy, throw you in jail. If you didn't do what the government wanted, you were, you probably were never seen again. So two of her uncles she never got to see them again after they were taken away in the middle of the night. My cousin, who actually came to Australia with us, he was a teenager when he came. He was taken to the re-education camp several times, and that was the reason why he left with us. He said he didn't want to go back. So
yeah, wow, that would have been a nightmare for a teenager at a re-education camp.
Yeah, so, being farmers, you can fit in if you're fit enough, you go and you do work hard labour, and that you had no choice, really. So that wasn't the life that my mum wanted us, to have.
But you made it to Wollongong. Do you remember first getting to Wollongong or first being in Wollongong?
Yeah, I do. I remember it wasn't a very nice or pleasant place to grow up at the beginning. Mum, I think, she sort of sheltered us, and I was the type of person that, really wanted to make friends, but Mum wouldn't think that making friends was important. She'd say, concentrate on school, you're here to get an education, why do you need friends? And when you're a kid, you just want to have, friends. You want people to like you. And, being Asian, I think there was like 3 kids in my whole primary school that were Asian, all speaking different Asian languages, so we couldn't even talk to each other. So we were sort of the odd ones out, and constantly getting bullied and teased, and it was really hard to make friends at the beginning. And Mum wasn't sympathetic to that. She just said, if they don't want to be friends with you, don't be friends with them. And that was sort of the,
That's a way to combat racism in the playground. Just don't be friends with them.
Yeah. But, when you're just trying so hard to fit in, like you don't want to be different, that, you look different, you dress different. I mean, we were so poor growing up that, Mum would just go to St. Vincent, and get whatever material she could to sew our uniforms. And, her sewing skills were pretty good, and they got better, over the years, but you still look different to everybody else when you're out of uniform. And so there was always, and lunches were a pain because Mum would always make these, awesome food that everybody wants now.
Yeah, awesome, but very for the 80s, unusual food. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like my kids always say, fried rice, sushi, that's all the things I want for lunch, and they were the things I hated. I didn't want Mum to give me any of that. I just wanted a sandwich.
Yeah, all of the other kids had what would be now called a pretty boring sandwich, but you would have had something that's very unusual in Wollongong in the 80s at the time.
Yeah, and just trying to fit in, and you just didn't. You just you looked so different and acted so different, and it was really hard at the beginning.
You now, you have family growing up here now. How are things different for them now? I mean, it's such a multicultural place, Wollongong. Do you think it has changed and grown up a lot?
Yes, it has. And I'm so glad that my parents made those sacrifices to come. I don't think my mum would ever make that trip again. Like she's, being out on sea for 6 days, she tells me, even if she was to, someone give her 80 million Powerball, she'll never get on that boat.
Well, 80 million Powerball, you would be getting flown in a very fancy jet back to wherever you wanted to go.
Exactly. Yeah. No, she just said that it's just the terror of, worrying about the boat capsizing. One of the things that Mum's told us when we got to Malaysian shores was the captain sank the boat so that the patrols couldn't pull us back out again because we'd run out of food and water. And so that was a tactic they'd do. They just sink the boat and they'd chuck everybody overboard, and you've got to make your way to the shore. And Mum was terrified because she doesn't know how to swim. She doesn't even know how we made it to shore without drowning. So it's just one of those things where we just, as soon as you see land, just make your way in. And we were quite lucky that the Red Cross came and took us to the refugee camp.
I guess you're speaking at this panel for Refugee Week on Thursday. People have, there are lots of opinions and stereotypes about refugees, about people who escape somewhere on a boat. What are some of those, I guess, myths that you want to dispel? I mean, you've been telling stories with us and us now, but what do you think, is wrong with people's opinions or people's ideas of refugees?
Well, I think with that, the whole concept of, people that are refugees, and I can't imagine putting my kids on a boat unless I thought that it was safer than being on land. There's no way I would make that decision. You have to understand that, they'd be leaving terror, they'd be leaving, that war-torn. Mum said growing up, one of those sounds that she used to listen to was, if you hear, "Ew," that means that's a good sound. It means the bombs are actually far away. But if you hear, that means that the bomb's about to drop nearby, and so you've got to find some shelter and hide. And I drop my kids off at school. I don't think about things like that. I don't need to worry about. I worry about if my kids are going to eat their lunch. I don't worry about if they, like if they got into trouble in class, or they're not things I worry about whether they're actually going to get bombed. So that's what my parents, that was what they had growing up. There was no freedom. You put money in the bank and you can't get it back out again. Like there was no withdrawals. You can only put deposits. So everybody hid cash on them. They never tried to, put money away or savings. There was no such thing like that. So very, very different life growing up. And my kids now, they have friends from all different, backgrounds. My husband's actually German Peruvian. And so my kids are a hybrid, lots of different, nationalities, and they just blend in. Yeah. Like at school, they, they have friends from lots of different cultures, and they don't think of themselves as being, Chinese. They just think of themselves as Australian. They don't think of themselves as German or Peruvian, or, it's just we're in Australia, we're Australian.
And speaking to Lone Natel, you talked about, your grandparents escaped or left China for Vietnam. Didn't escape, they left and then found out they couldn't come back. And as a result, they left their son there as well. But they managed to meet up again when your parents, your mum, brought your grandparents out to see you. What was that like when they sponsored your grandparents to come out, and a giant family reunion after all having to, essentially be split up?
It was amazing. My parents, we saved every dime, every dollar, I guess you call it, every dollar we had to make sure that we could sponsor my grandparents to Australia. And I still remember the day we went to the airport to, just tears everywhere. Everybody was so happy and so, crying, and it was amazing. And then we did the same thing again, when we actually were able to go from Australia into China to visit my uncle. It was just so good to be able to hold each other. Wow. I think back then as well, we don't have social media and you can get onto video calls and things like that. Back then it was just you send a letter by, in the mail, and it might arrive months later. And Mum remembers, sending a letter to her mum, asking when when my siblings were being born, asking them for advice about names and things like that. And that those letters would arrive, months and months later than they were, months and months late. So you couldn't have that quick communication that you do these days. So it was hard. It was hard for Mum growing up here without her parents.
Lone Natel, thank you so much for speaking and telling us your story today. And thank you for chatting to everyone for Refugee Week.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for your time.
Cheers. ABC Illawarra is where you are. What a story. And just imagine that family reunion. That was the bit that really got me just thinking about seeing your grandparents again after so long. Beautiful stuff.